We are live. Apologies. So, first time using this medium, and as always, there might be some technical errors, but gratefully we were able to figure it out quickly. So we are live. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you to my guest Edyka for being here this morning. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series. This is conversations on or of intimate spaces. I am so appreciative of you for being here, being my first guest this morning. I'm excited for this series, and as we've chatted and talked about it for a while, I know that you are as well, and I appreciate that. So please introduce yourself to the world, to the guest.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Jewel. Congratulations on this beautiful offering that you're giving the world as your platform grows and as the interest in alternative living amongst women of color, people of color grow in these ways. So my name is Edyka Chilomé, and I am, I suppose, I would say professionally, I have crafted a life in which I've been ID'd as a poet and a writer. Pre-pandemic, I was a full-time traveling poet, performance poet, spoken word poet, speaker, um, community cultural worker. And I had the privilege of moving through the continent and finding family and community that supported my work and that allowed me to bear witness to their own work. I have been constantly drawn and rooted throughout my whole life in liberation struggles of people of color. And I come from lineages of migrating peoples from what is now known as Mexico and what is known as Centro America. Um, and I identify as a mestiza, detribalized indigenous woman. And that has a whole lot of elements and moving parts in terms of how we locate ourselves to the land, how we locate ourselves to history, colonial history, and the encounters of different peoples. Uh, but I live into that in my work, and I live um, to teach that, express that, learn that, live that in the ways that I move in the world, including the choices that I've made in terms of housing. So, as of late and more recently, I have taken the plunge to dare to live differently and have been so inspired by your work, Ms. Jewel, in terms of so many elements. One, that your house is so fly, and then two, that you are a Black woman, a woman of color who has chosen to become very visible, as to be a beacon of light for many of us who do not see ourselves reflected in this movement, right? That has been mostly white, male dominated, as if white men are the only ones that can choose how to live and build a home for themselves and move
Right.
in the world in interesting ways. And I always put a quotation on tiny house movement because the reality for myself and for many of us is, we've lived in tiny spaces for generations, and us to choose how to do so out of intentional abundance as opposed to scarcity, as opposed to this is all we can get, is a really interesting conversation for me. So I am so grateful to be a part of this inaugural conversation around creating home and how we're choosing abundance and space and
Yes.
all of the things. So that is my introduction. I'm so happy to be a part of this. And hello to everyone who is joining us here today.
That
Oh,
was
I
a
also want to say,
beautiful.
I also want to say that it's really important, as I do this work in my relationship and identity to the land. I'm located and living right now on what is the riverlands of the Arkikosa River, or what is known by its colonial name, the Trinity River, in what is known as North Texas, particularly the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And this is home. These are lands that have been taken care of by the Tankawa, the Caddo and Comanche and a lot of other tribes throughout the last couple hundreds of years, and that continue to be here. And I just always want to shout out to all of the Indigenous water protectors and land protectors who are continuously fighting for our ability to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And so I just want to shout out that I am down here in the U.S. South. Let me mute this. And so anybody who is calling in from the Texas areas, I am over here with y'all. So that I just want to include.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. I think a great way to get us started in this conversation. So first and foremost, before we dig into it, just tell us how long you've been in your tiny house, and is this the first house that you've owned?
So this particular iteration of this tiny house, I've been here since the spring of last year. So we're coming up maybe to a year. And so, but before that, I lived in a pop-up camper for about a year, waiting for this house to be built. So
Okay.
and before that, I was living on the road, which is a whole nother minimalist kind of tiny existence reality. And I lived that way for a year before that. So I've been um, completely very minimalist at least for the last 3 years intentionally, and probably my whole life otherwise, because I was not raised to consume or to buy many things because we were broke and we came
Okay,
from
wait, wait,
reality.
wait, 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 wait. We gonna come to that. Wait, 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 wait,
Okay, let's go.
wait.
Let's go. But
Don't
just
go.
so that you know, right. So I've been in this
Absolutely.
house since last spring. Yep.
Okay.
hmm
Okay.
And
All
this
right.
is my first. This is my first house that I own on paper
Okay.
and that I've chosen to have. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I want to share some of the pictures that you provided of your
Yeah.
home and have you kind of introduce your home to the audience.
Yeah.
So I think you on the screen. They are you able to see the pictures? It's the
I am not, unfortunately.
Okay. So it's the picture, the front of your house, the outside of the house.
Okay, so this is my house, Casita Chilomé. And one of the things that distinguishes it from a lot of different other tiny homes on wheels is the brightness of the colors. And this is a really important choice for me, and is a really big kind of identifier of this house. It, the lands from which I come from, the people from which I come from, like many people of the global majority of the global South, many people of color, Indigenous folks from all over the world, is that we honor color, right? And it is important as a form of reminder of the kind of the diversity of bio realities that we live on this earth with. So, many Indigenous peoples we have colorful clothing where our skin tones look better with colorful colors that are bright and strong. And so this color combination would be something very common. You would see houses painted in anywhere you would go in Latin America that is not already colonized by US kind of aesthetics or European aesthetics. And it's very intentional for me, the choice to paint all the doorways and windows in the red color. Part of the mestizo indigenous traditions of my people that actually has roots in African traditions is to protect doorways with the color red, or protect yourself with the color red from energies or different kind of harmful energies that might enter your body or your home. So that was something that came to me last minute. I had chosen the purple and the teal and had a different configuration of the colors, but it was a really important thing that came to me last minute to do that on the doorways and the windows, and I'm glad I did. So I was really happy that this house came out in the exterior form that it did, because prior I had not seen not one, other than your house, which I really enjoy the window configuration and the red. But I had not seen another exterior of a tiny house on wheels that I really liked. I thought they were all really boring and I didn't like it. And so I didn't know how to pull it together because I didn't have any reference points. So I went back to what I knew and
Okay.
chose these colors. And yeah, and so that's the exterior.
Okay. All right. And then I am changing. So now it's the interior. Your kitchen is on the left.
Yeah, so this is the kind of the main shot of my house looking, from the bathroom to the front door is on the left, right in front of the kitchen. So I designed this house to have a focal point of this beautiful painting called Mujer de Maíz, Woman of Corn, that was done by an elder in Yanaguana, in what is known as San Antonio, Texas. And it was a piece that's traveled all over the Southwest to California and was a part of the anniversary showing of the Mujeres Maíz or 20-year anniversary. And I saw it on a wall in a gallery, in a little, gallery in San Antonio, and I thought, what if I had this in my house? Because it was a painting that floored me. I didn't have any
Mm-hmm.
words. It was
Yeah.
so powerful and beautiful, and so she is the matriarch that also protects this home, that reminds me of my warrior roots and matrilineal lines, and I just feel so honored to have this piece, my first invested art piece. And I designed the home to have an inlet for this piece, and wanted her to be the focus. And I also have a hammock that serves as my kind of couch area. This is also, my people. We sleep on floors and we use hammocks. This is
Mm-hmm.
like ancient technologies, thousands of years that people have used this kind of form. And so this was important for me to have in my house. I have a piano in my house too, as you can see in that picture. A lot of people are like, "What is?" That's one of the things that are like, "That's incredible." I designed the house to put that piano in here because I am an artist, and though I primarily use the form of writing, music is something that is so important to my creative spirit. And so a piano has always been a part of my reality, and I always wanted to own one. I said, when I have my first home, I'm going to have a piano, and I did not
Mm-hmm.
veer away
You did
from
not.
yep. So that's the configuration, the main configuration. Of course, I have a loft upstairs that you don't see in a bathroom that's behind a pocket door, but that is the main area of my house.
Okay. And now I'm going to change to the picture the wood stove.
So this is a really important part. Me and Ms. Jewel were just talking about what it means for us to be moving towards off-grid realities, right? As we're witnessing kind of the breakdown of some of the systems in the urban centers of this country and the lack of sustainability of this extractive fuel system in this world. After the big freeze last winter in Texas, and we went without water and electricity, and dipped under negative degree weather, it was really important for me to make the choice to have a wood stove in the house.
Absolutely.
And so this is a big piece that I'm learning how to use and learning how to coexist with, and something I wanted to be able to cook on if I needed to, and provide heat that is independent. And of course, because I'm Central American, particularly from Cuscatlan, what is known as El Salvador, any Salvadorian or Central American people will tell you we are machete people. This is a tool that has been used for so many uses, agricultural and warfare. So it is a weapon, it is a tool, and it sits by every door in my house. I have two doors in my house, and you see the machete right there hanging. And then, of course, the calendario Maya that sits right by the fire. The fire is also a focal point in my spiritual tradition. So it was also important for me to have space for me to do that and engage that. So this is also a really important focal point of my house that speaks to my own cultural and spiritual traditions and ways that I move from day to day in my life.
It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay, so you've touched on this. Thank you so much for the share. You've touched on this a lot in the conversation. But if I'm standing outside, I'm looking at your house. So I believe for me to look at my house is to see me, obviously. You've
Mm.
spoken to that as well. What, in a couple of sentences, does your house say about you, or what do you want your house to reflect of you? If I'm looking at your house, what statement does it make about you?
Uh, I hope that it makes the statement that anything else in my life does, of that I hold the memory of my people and who I am and our relationship to the land, from the color to the way that the inside is set up, is a intentional holding on to the memory of my people, of our, like I said, the relationship to land. So the colors reflect the diversity that we honor in my spiritual tradition, my cultural tradition, and heritage. The inside reflects the ways that I move day to day. So it is me. Like you have a beautiful meme that you posted that was like, to see my home is to see me.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly.
It's and me does not look like the little McMansions that a lot of these white men are constantly creating and building. And it does not look like a watered down, washed out version of some ethnic kind of like dynamic. When you when you walk into my home, you don't see kind of the caricature commercial kind of Mexican like aesthetic that even some white folks try to build Airbnbs around, right? There's like a flavor that you can choose for your interior decorating. This is, you feel that this is authentically who I am, and it's not something you can purchase at some store or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's important for that authenticity to come through, because just like the colors, we need diversity of aesthetics to speak to our human side, to learn from each other truly, not learn about the white gaze that defines us in commercial cultures. So I think that that's what makes both of our houses very specific, is that these are things that call to our spirit, and not just the commercial branding of what our people are, what our ethnic kind of aesthetic is supposed to be.
I think that's important. One of the things early on that started happening as I'd share my home on social media and then share some of my thoughts, if something was going on in the world that impacted me as a Black woman, I oftentimes get comments kind of similar to what they say to the athletes, just, we want you to shut up and play. Basically, I came here for the pictures. I just wanted to look at the pictures of your house. And I was very clear from the beginning to like what you said, to see me or to see my home, and vice versa. To see my home is to see me, and to see me is to see my home. And you don't get to get one without the other. You don't get to tell me, to shut up and just dribble, and I don't get to, you don't see the Black woman that operates in this space that has feelings, that's impacted by what's going on in the world. And that's very, very important for me. And it's like, at that point I was like, if you need to unfollow, please feel free to unfollow,
Right.
because
Exactly.
this is me, this is my home, and it's like a whole package. You don't get to get one without the other.
Exactly. And the thing is that we can choose not to give one without the other. I think that that's an
Absolutely.
important thing that you're modeling for so many of us, that we don't have to shut up and be pretty and show our pretty little house. It's important to own it, because at the end of the day, extractive white culture will take our homes and try to replicate it. But so we might as well show them and say, this is why this is, and this is what it is. And I think that it's important for us to be committed to that. And nothing's worth kind of cutting ourselves down and minimizing ourselves.
Absolutely.
And that's important to say. Mhm.
Absolutely. So you were just getting ready to touch on this a few minutes ago. When you consider your journey to tiny, thinking of how you grew up, maybe home as you were growing up, whatever that looks like, what influences were there that led you to this point?
So, I talked about my whole adult life, I've lived tiny, right? Because it's like, yeah, I've been broke and I've been an artist and I've lived in tiny homes with roommates and it's, it's kind of the reality, especially for my generation, in which housing continues to rise,
Hmm.
the price of housing continues to rise. They don't want to give us living wages, and it's scarce out here to really find housing stability that feels comfortable. And it has nothing to do with size. In the spaces that I lived, it wasn't the space, it was the quality of where I was. I mean, I lived where landlords did not care and
Hmm.
let things just fall apart and have dangerous situations in the buildings. And this is the kind of quality of living that I want to see Black and Brown people reject and and protest and resist, because we deserve better. Prior to that, though, both of my families are campesino families. That means they were poor and they worked for large agricultural companies. Many of them, my mother came here with her family and worked in the fields picking cotton in California and Utah and in the West and Southwest, in Illinois sometimes seasonally. And they lived out of their car, and they lived in shacks that were provided by the owners of these like plantations. And my father lived out in the mountains, and the way that Indigenous people lived, we didn't have these huge structures that we stayed all day in to play on our computer and like and watch TV. You had a structure in which housed the things that needed to be covered, and you had hammocks, maybe inside or outside, and you had an outdoor kitchen, and you had a very open layout with the land. And so it wasn't until my family migrated to the United States because of US backed genocide in Central America and US intervention that caused extreme poverty for many people in Mexico, that we came to this country and my parents were fed this idea that having things, having wealth, and having things that showed that wealth in the American way was the way to survive. So they drank that
Right.
Kool-Aid. They wanted to have the big house, and they wanted to have the cars, and they wanted to have big salary job, and they wanted me to have all those things. And
Because
as
that's
children
what
of
America says success looks like. Yeah.
that's right. And it's not just we want to be American. I think it's important for me to come into adulthood and have more compassion about it. It's we want to survive. We want to live. In the history of Central America and El Salvador during the Civil War, if you were heard speaking your traditional language or you were wearing your traditional clothes, you were shot on the spot.
Mm.
That was the kind of reality. So anything you could do to disassociate from that identity, disassociate from that way of living, and live more like the people with the guns, the safer your physical reality was. And so when
Okay.
when my father came to the United States, it was such a commitment that he had to make to like survive, to live, and to assimilate to survive and live. And so I grew up being told that I should want those things. I should want a
Gotcha.
big house.
Hmm.
I should want a big car. I should want a job that's gonna suck my soul out so that I could afford this big house and this big car. And it's something that I have uh, adamantly rejected to and the consequence and price of that has been a really intense conflict with my family and both of my parents. And so
Mm.
that generational rupture has been really really difficult to navigate. Um, and I also think it's my responsibility to remember and to honor my grandparents and the generations before them that didn't believe in these things and held strong to the traditions of growing your own food, living off grid, harvesting rain, canning, and doing all these different ways of living. And that's something that is our inheritance culturally. It's not
Hmm.
something that white people taught us or can sell us. It's something that we have always lived with for hundreds and thousands of years, and that they rebrand as permaculture or off-grid living or whatever. So I think it's been important for me to remember that and to have that as a backdrop of all my decisions to go tiny. And I didn't grow up really believing. My mother was less of a consumer than my father, and they got divorced, and I grew up with my mother, who even when she got money, she still lived like she was poor. And that's something
Okay.
that we see in our communities as well too, right? It's like that poverty trauma is still very real
Right,
because you're
right.
one generation out of barely having anything to eat.
Absolutely.
So,
That's why the
so you
tiny house movement doesn't appeal to our community in
know.
to so many people because it represents poverty in their mindset.
Absolutely. But in the reality of it is that when we think about when we ask ourselves what truly is freedom, what truly does make us happy. And this is one thing that the white folks do say. It's like the ability to travel, the ability to not have to think about, all these bills, the ability to like not have your life dictated by how much money you do or do not have. And so that freedom is really important. And I've learned that making these decisions has allowed me to do that, not spending all this money to show that I have money, but spending money to invest in having enough money to not have to worry about the little things, which is something that I'm working towards constantly. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Okay, so I know you spoke a little bit of where you're located. I also know that you are having to relocate soon, very soon. We were talking in a conversation, and this is kind of new for me, especially with the me now being in a new farm and connecting to the land. That's not something that I know as my background, but there was a beautiful conversation where I was asking you about this new space and when you were going to decide where you're moving, and you shared with me that you were going to visit the location, but you were also going to ask the land. Um,
Mm.
eh, can you share a little bit? That was so meaningful to me, and I've heard it expressed before. Not, and it's something that I know, especially the location where I am, making sure that I recognize I'm the new person here. So these
Yeah.
animals and everything that I'm dealing with, look, this is your
Yeah.
space. I'm just trying to be
That's
here, and
right.
I need to coexist with you all. But there's more to it that you were speaking to, and I'd like for you to talk about that if you would.
Yes, absolutely. And you bring up such an important point that I'll start with is that if anyone on here that's watching has ever had the experience of growing up in the city, in an urban environment where there's more cement than there is natural worlds, and you go and try to live or spend time out in the country where there is less cement and more natural worlds, you feel the difference. Listen,
Oh,
you
absolutely.
have a shock to your system in which you realize you are not the only one there. There are things that could potentially harm you in some real ways, and you sober up real quick, and you have a humility if you're smart. You have a humility
Absolutely.
about what it means to be there. Like you're saying, I'm a guest here. I know y'all been here. I'm just trying to make peace and be in my little house.
Exactly.
You I don't want no problems.
No,
And
look,
it's,
one
it's
second. We've got snow, and I identified some footprints in the snow. I need to look Google and see what these footprints are because they're kind of big. So yes,
first.
I need to know what this was because it was very close. So yes, ma'am.
That's right. That's right. And there are things you don't think about, right? The things that if you leave like your dog food outside, you leave, you're attracting, you inviting visitors you don't necessarily want to invite. There's so many
Absolutely.
things. There's so many things. Right. And so we have that. I had that experience too. I mean, I went back to my countries, to my mother and father's countries when I was younger, but only spent a little bit of time there and always came back to the city. But when I started spending a lot more time on the land and in particular in the jungles in Latin America and Central America and Mexico, the jungles especially, because you have life all over you. Like you feel like you have 100,000 eyeballs on you, and
I'm
you have to
sure.
be really careful. Now, we're talking about the animals, but we also have to recognize that
The
trees,
spirit.
there are
Yes.
trees around us that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. I
Right.
mean, they live
Right.
in reality similar to us, but they live in such slow motion and they have witnessed and have been a part of mycelial networks and life giving systems in that space for hundreds and thousands of years around the world. So there's something to be said about how we approach our living on this land that is different from white folks who have no humility a lot of times around what it means to come into a space and not care who's there, obviously. you
and it's
know
kind
they
of
can
spit
come in,
into gentrification.
the colonial history of coming to this land, killing everybody and everything that's there, and then building their mansions, right? But the reality for us is, if we want to live on an off-grid reality, we want to grow food, we want to do these things that will keep us healthy and safe and sustainable, we have to be in good relationship with the land around us. And that means all the animals and the trees and all the energies. And spiritually, we have language for this. You know, if we look back as Black and Brown people in our traditions, we find that our ancestors had ceremonies and rituals and ways of asking for permission. And so that is something that I honor in my own walk around the world. When I traveled and lived as a full-time traveler, any land that I landed on and laid my head down to rest on, I said, hello, this is who I am. This is what
Okay.
I'm doing here. I mean no harm. I want to ask if it's okay for me to be here. And listen, you will get responses back. If you do that with heart and you sit down and you speak those intentions in whatever way you want to with your heart, you know, my elder says there's no wrong way in doing these rituals as long as you're doing it from the heart, that you will get responses, you know, and I do that when I pick, you know, plants, when I pick my veggies, I ask for permission from the plants. And this is important because we have done a lot of damage as humans. You know, I won't say we. Humans have done a lot of damage to other living things on this earth. And so it's our time now for us as people who are more conscious of that history and our realities to do it in a good way and to do it in a respectful way. And so I will be visiting some places and some potential next parking spots, and more than just the logistics with the humans that may own that space or may let me be there. It's important for me to also ask permission of the land, because if the land is like, no, we don't want you here, and the animals are like, nah, we don't want no human over here, we don't like y'all, then I'm not going to be there. What am I going to look like being there? That's
Right.
that sounds like a headache
Right.
for me, and I'm not trying to invite those problems.
Not at all. Not at all. And it's interesting. So that is your approach because of your culture, and so that's just inherent in the way you approach locations. That's not been my experience, but the interesting thing for me in this location, I've been here since May, um, basically in solitude, which has been, you know, a
Mhm.
opportunity for growth.
Right.
And there are things that there's an energy out here that is undeniable. And I
Mm.
have been trying to kind of stretch myself to learn more about it. Um, and I had an experience, and I don't know if I shared it with you, but I had an experience. I was here one day working, and on a conference call, and kind of focused on the conference call, but I started feeling my energy, like my body getting tight, and I didn't know what was happening. And then I realized that there were some hunters on the land,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
hunting with dogs.
Right.
And they were in the woods, and the energy that made me just have so much anxiety. Obviously, it took me back to our bodies being hunted.
That's right.
I've not personally and physically experienced that, read about it, you know, seen it in movies, but it affected me physically in that, you know, I ended up with tears and I
Mhm.
had, you know, I had to stop and try to figure out what was happening. And then
Yeah.
that's when I could see or that's when I could hear what was happening in the background. I talked to a friend of mine, and she was saying, you know, Jewel, that's in our DNA. That, you know, that
Mhm.
is our experience in our DNA. So I am trying to, that's why I ask you to share that, because I am trying to learn, and we've had some conversations about that. So I am trying to learn to be a better steward of the
Yep.
earth, coexisting, kind of like what you said, you have eyes on you. So there's some cats over here that I've started. Well, I've got two big skunks that just, you know, they run the show, and I'm just trying to stay out of their way. And I've got a group of cats over here that every once in a while I'll feed, because I want them to stay in
Yeah.
the area. I want them to hunt. I don't
Right.
want them to get used to me feeding them, but every once in a while I feed them. And it was one day that I was sitting here, and I just felt like somebody was watching me. And I looked out the window, and the cat was sitting over there. And, I mean, he was posted up looking at the house like, what time is dinner today? And I just had to crack up laughing, because I just felt like somebody was watching me. And look out the window, and there he was, just posted up like, ma'am, you've started something. What time can we expect this? And so so
It is, you're absolutely right that it is the energy and being respectful of everything that's happening here. So I'm learning. I
Yeah,
am definitely
and
learning.
I think it's important that you bring up a really important point. You know, you say, you know, I do these things because of my cultural traditions, but also if that experience of being hunted, that real experience of violence is a part of our inherited DNA memory, so is the intuitive inclination to be in collaboration with other animals and
Absolutely.
plants
Right.
around us. Your
Right.
instinct to be like, "Hey, I want y'all cats to stay around. Let's be friends. Here's an
Yes.
offering."
Yes.
That's you know, no one taught you that, right? Maybe I don't know, but for a
No.
lot of us, these are things that just come to us because it makes sense. If I want to
Absolutely.
exist here and you're existing here, well, how can we exist here together? And that is something that we need to continuously move into because if we want to survive, what's coming up in the next 25, 50 years with global warming and all these different things, we need to make friends that are not humans that have the capacity to
Absolutely.
support who we are
Yeah.
and that have always supported what we are, right? Every piece of food that we eat is the land being in collaboration and solidarity with us. And so we have to honor that. And that's just being a good person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, your value system and your home. So when if succinctly, if I think of if I see, if someone looks at my house and if they were to be able to tell how it represented my value system, the words that I would think of would be freedom. I want people, my desire in building my tiny house was I wanted to feel free. I wanted to feel a lighter lifestyle so that I could move in a different direction throughout the world. And also security. Like I wanted to be in a position where no one could take home from me again. Yeah, and I've
That's
not had home taken from me, but being in a financial position where you're working and you get laid off and everything then is at risk because you need that specific income. I
right.
didn't want to be in that type of position again. And also intentionality. This was a decision to live this way. And creativity is another word. You've talked about this, but what about your value system? What words would you say that your home speaks to, you know,
Yeah,
in your value system?
yeah. Um, Obviously, similar values to you. The concept of autonomy and sustainability outside of kind of the matrix of uh, wage labor, and the insecurity of housing. Like having that autonomy, right? Autonomy is a value system for me and for many Indigenous peoples. Of what does it mean for us to be able to live on our own, name ourselves, live our life, and not have it dictated by
Hmm.
colonial systems, but also beauty, right? It's important for me that my people see you can live in beauty in ways that feel abundant and luxurious, right? Like me and you, I've heard both of us joke that we got, luxury apartments in the middle of the country. And it's
My
so
cousin
crazy
said
to me.
a Manhattan upscale apartment in the middle of a farm.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So a lot of our people, because we've been indoctrinated with either we are poor and have nothing, and it's a terrible existence, or we have our abundance and wealth looks like whatever white systems have taught us, big mansions that look like X, Y, and Z. But living in our autonomous indigenous ways can look beautiful, and that's something that I really want to share with people. It can feel familiar in some of the most creative and intimate ways, and it can feel luxurious, and it can be beautiful, and that beauty is something that can feed us so much, can feed our peace, can feed our creativity, feel our hearts. And I think that we take it for granted because it's been sold to us as something that you can't attain unless you have wealth or unless you're lucky. but it is something that we can build for ourselves. So the autonomy to live abundantly and beautifully is something that I want to scream from all rooftops in the cities, that we can do more than this. We deserve more than this. It is our birthright to have more than just being, stuffed into these dilapidated buildings, one on top of the other, not even having any control of whether or not we're safe. Like those things are things we need to actively unnormalize, because we have not lived that way for long. It's only been a couple hundred years, as opposed to thousands of years, that our people have built such beautiful and impressive forms of existing, and that's something we don't have access to because we're not taught our history, and we don't have those memories in our conscious minds. But in our hearts, every single person that is watching this video right now, I think, has that DNA memory that I want something better. I want something more than what is offered in this reality. And because we have known something more than what has been offered in this reality. So this is just one little step towards that. And my tiny home also, it's on wheels because I'm also in this búsqueda, in this journey to find home, but home being not in a physical building, but in community, on land. So this is also something that I want people to see when they see my house. Like, oh, that house can travel, and say, absolutely, it can travel, because I'm a part of a migrating people where we live in conversation with each other, and we live in conversation with the land. As it's changing, we also change. And so, that is something that's important. So autonomy, migration, and beauty, these are things that are really important values to me, because migration is a human right. It is a right for us to move about the earth freely and be able to find what it is we're looking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so I've lived in my home and been involved in the tiny house movement a little over 7 years now. And I've definitely had a shift in how I operate within the movement since I first started within the movement, because I think I was kind of just approaching it from my home, living in my tiny house. And then I realized, with that, as being one of the first Black women or person of color that people were seeing in the movement, there came a responsibility.
Right?
And
Yeah.
I needed to kind of hold space for our community, because we weren't seeing ourselves in the larger community. Um, I also feel like we entered this pandemic, I've seen a shift in where before I was sharing my journey and kind of, what we were talking about, how success looks like excess and big. And, I was defending my home and talking to why this was something that was necessary. I feel like there's a shift happening in our community as a result of the pandemic, where people, and outside of our community as well, where people are having to reevaluate so many things. And this
Right.
now doesn't seem like a foreign concept anymore. It's
Right.
something that
Right.
absolutely makes sense.
Yes.
For
Yeah.
me personally, this shift, because there was a period before moving back into my house in May where I was in an apartment because I was looking for a location. I wasn't safe in the location where my home had been previously. And just as I moved into that apartment is when the pandemic hit. And I felt all kinds of uncomfortable in this, because early on we didn't know what was happening, and you really needed your
Because we
neighbor
still
to
don't know
do
what's
the
happening, but yes.
true. We got a little more clarity, but yes. But
Right.
you really needed your neighbor to do the right thing for your safety.
Right.
And I was just
Right.
in this building, and everybody was wilding out and just doing,
Yeah.
whatever. And
Yeah.
I didn't feel physically safe with it was like, like they were comparing it to like the school project, where you're the one person that's always
Right.
doing the work,
Right.
and nobody else is doing what they're supposed to
Right.
be doing. That's exactly the way I felt. And so when I had the opportunity to get back to my house, um even though I'm, like I said, I'm way back in the deep country, my sense of gratitude, my practice of gratitude changed and grew, because um in the solitude I also felt safe.
Yeah.
And there was like a opportunity for healing. There were so many things. Even, I'm by myself, but I feel more comfortable and can now, address dealing with the world. But I have this place of sanctuary. How
Yeah.
has the pandemic impacted or has it impacted your thoughts of home, and your tiny house, in this journey, from starting and we were outside of that, and now this change, has that impacted your thought process at all?
Absolutely. So similar to you, like where we were at when the pandemic hit, I was on the road. I was literally living, being housed by people all over Turtle Island, all over the continent, and hopping on planes and hopping on stages and engaging with people in community. And I had started to put away money because I thought this is the only way I'm going to afford a home, right? This is also, we're there's an age difference between us, and for my generation, I feel like is becoming less and less uh, a conceivable idea to actually buy a traditional home for us. For
Mm-hmm.
us who
Mm-hmm.
graduated college in the last few years, who graduated grad school in the last few years, like the price of housing, and now where basically at the time of the pandemic, my source of income was completely done. It was,
Okay.
there were no more gatherings in person. I was getting paid doing performances and doing in-person workshops and doing speaking engagements at conferences and universities. And these things no longer were happening for a whole year. I mean, we're starting slowly to adapt to online realities, but it was like, okay, well, now I have no home. I cannot travel. The pandemic has called a shutdown to everything any way that I chose to move, and I don't want to be in the cities anymore because this is going to start
Right.
wilding out. Like you were saying,
Right.
I already knew I didn't live that, but I already knew that people were going to just start, making decisions, and things were going to just start breaking down in ways that I wasn't going to feel safe. And so the decision to say I need to up my timeline and really think about this tiny home thing seriously now. And I consulted, my own ancestors and my own spirits. And I was like, look, this is what I want to do. I don't know how I'm gonna get this money, but here's my intention.
Right.
Hello, and it came
Come
together
through.
for me. Yeah, and it came together for me as it often does for all of us as we continue surviving in ways that we don't always understand. But I absolutely took that opportunity to engage with some friends at the time and say, look, we want to get out of the city. If you want to come with us and put your tiny house on the land, you're welcome. And I said, absolutely. And like living out in the country where I have less interaction with people, in one way, it's this huge emotional journey of mourning the life that
Right.
I lived,
Right.
constantly
Right.
around
For
people
sure.
that I was constantly fed. And then it was also welcoming this reality of like, this was right on time because I no longer want to live in the cities. This is not
Mm-hmm.
something that I want to do at all. I think it's possible to live in a tiny house. Many people do it inside of the city. I'm not interested in doing that because of my focus is more interested on living in collaboration with the land in ways that are going to help me move towards my goal and my values of being autonomous. So, I mean, absolutely, this also felt really on time. And it feels like a lot of people got interested in me doing this because everybody's
Mm-hmm.
like, look, I think I should do that too. And I'm like, I think we
Right.
should all do this too. Let's get
Right.
free. Let's go. Like, because
Right.
this is ridiculous. Yep.
Yeah, the conversation when I was, 2013, 2014, when I was talking about tiny houses and saying I was going to build a tiny house, and people were like, "Are you having a hardship? Do you need somewhere to
Right.
stay?"
Right.
And they were looking at me like I had three heads. Now, in 2022, people are like, "Can I pick your brain? Let's talk about this. Let
Right.
me pick your
Right.
brain." So yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I
Yes.
agree with all of that. In this journey, have you discovered or learned anything new about yourself that you didn't know before?
Well, I mean, I feel like this is where I want to invite you into the conversation, particularly around what it means to be a woman doing this, because I think that, and we've talked about this briefly, but being a young woman, and I'm 31 years old. I feel like I probably still read like I'm like 20 something or even a teenager sometimes, but that's just
No,
the way we set up.
know, I
Wait,
hadn't gotten I hadn't gotten teenager or anything like that, but oh my God was like, oh, you're younger than my daughter. I had no idea, but go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, being a young woman, right? And having to make decisions that I think were often modeled for me as decisions that men would make in terms of building. I mean, when you custom build a home, you're choosing everything from the framing to the insulation and when you design, you got to make all these choices. And you also have to collaborate usually with men who are the ones that kind of lead the industry of building and engaging. And there was a lot of, obviously, as we can imagine, as women of color particularly, like there was a lot of frustration around having to insist on being respected, insist on being heard as someone who is competent enough to make decisions and understand how these things work. And so there was a lot of me learning that I could trust myself,
Absolutely.
that I could advocate for myself, that I could make the decisions. I mean, it was absolutely wild for me to consider, after living in apartments in these small, like dilapidated spaces where you don't have a choice. You just kind of fit in how you can and try to make it pretty as enough, and you work around what is already there. To make the decision and say, okay, where do I want the kitchen? What does my day to day look like? Like, what is ideal? And I'm just like overwhelmed because I'm like, I never thought I'd ever have the opportunity to design something to my way of life and who I am. What a gift. And also how overwhelming. What if I make a wrong
Right,
choice?
right,
What
right.
if what if I forget something? What if I don't do something correctly? And da da da. And ultimately those thoughts were the reasons I decided to work with a builder, which, is like, I want to make sure the house is built right. I don't want to like fuck it up and try to do it myself and the roof is falling in or whatever. But the downside of it is that, you're working with these men that have never seen a woman, first of all, young, brown woman like me, who is, asking them to build a house for me, not my husband, not, my son dealing with all, it's like, yeah. So I learned that I had a lot more strength and a lot more ability than I thought I did. And I have the capacity to choose the kind of life that I want to live in some real materialized, manifested ways, not just, emotionally or intellectually, but like I can create the world that I want to live in. And so I also want to ask you the same question of what you learned about yourself in that way, because I think it's important for your viewers and for everyone who's tuned in to understand that if you are a woman, if you are a woman of color that is going about this process, just like every other process that we have to go through in formalities, you're going to experience a transformative and potentially challenging experience in this journey. So
Yeah,
tell
I've
me from
shared
you.
that exact same thought. I'm a project manager by trade, and that's also the way my brain works. So even going into building my house, I needed to know everything. So I had researched like a year and a half, almost 2 years about tiny houses before I even my sister and I designed my house. So I knew what I knew inside and out. But then when I went into the build process, just like what you were saying, there were so many times where I was second guessing what I knew and not feeling
Yeah,
confident in what I knew.
right.
And my takeaway, and I think I made I know I wrote a blog post about it afterwards, was trusting myself, learning to trust that I know what I know, learning to use my voice and stand on my voice and require that people respect that I know what I know. And it still happens, like you said, it's a very male dominant field, and there are times, I know how to do something. I sourced all of the material for my house. I know I purchased my trailer. I insulated my trailer. Like, I know my house from the ground up. And so when
Right.
something is happening to it, I mostly know what's wrong with it. I oftentimes just can't physically fix it. And so then that
Right.
means requiring, a contractor. And right now I've got, some good contractors that value that I know what I'm talking about. But over the years, there have been so many times where I've called somebody in to say, I need you to do such and such, this works this way, and I need you to do such and such. And then they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. No, that's not how that works. And it's like, this is my home. I know exactly how it works. I need you to do exactly what I'm telling you to do. And then
Right.
finally they'll get around to it and then they're like, oh, that you were right. Yeah, I know I was right. And so that is the same thing that I have said, just trusting yourself. And so there's so many times like I'll sit in a place of something, maybe I'm trying to do something different or I'm trying to do something new. And then I'm, second guessing myself, even, launching this series, is this going to work? Blah, blah, blah. And then as I'm sitting here at my desk, I sit here and have to think, Jewel, you designed and built a house on wheels that's right there. And then you did it
That's
again and
right.
you designed a space and it's right here and you're sitting in it.
That's
And it's like,
right. That's
trust
right.
yourself and
That's
know that you can do hard things. You are resilient, you are creative. And so that is one of the things that I agree that was a learned thing about myself, is just making sure that I'm always trusting myself and not second guessing what I know. So yeah, I'm there with you 100%.
And I think it's important to know that it's not a linear process, that it's not like you figure this out and then you live into it and then you never have doubts. It's like like you
No,
said, each part of
exactly.
the journey, each different journey, you have to confront yourself and say, all right, you know what you're doing, chill out. Let's lay that anxiety down. Let's move forward. And it's hard. So I think that labor is ultimately extra labor for us as women who have been socialized and taught to not trust ourselves, to not advocate for ourselves, actively taught that we should not, or have actively met resistance in doing so in our lives. And I think that if you're thinking about moving tiny and doing it as a single woman of color, like, be prepared to confront those deep dark parts of yourself and transform and heal in those ways, because you have to, and
Yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
beautiful part of
Absolutely. And
it.
it's interesting that you said that it's a constant self reminder, because, it can be something simple and I'm sitting here contemplating whether or not I can do it and not giving myself credit. And it's just a learned behavior that we have to unlearn, um,
That's right.
for sure. And then one of the reasons that I wanted to have these conversations, and one of the reasons that I share my journey, is because I don't want people to think it's just easy. I've had that conversation where a woman commented on my house and she was like, this is just like um, the white people's houses, which I don't feel like success doesn't have to be white. We can be successful. But her comment was, this is just like the white people's house as far as, the cost, as I shared how much my house costs. And it's basically unattainable, is what she said. And my comment to her was, you're looking at the finished results. You've not asked me my journey to get here. You've not asked me how I financed
Mhm.
it. You've not asked any of those questions, but you're looking at the finished result and already counting yourself out. So that, to me, is why these conversations are necessary, so we can talk about, how did you get here? What did that look like? What were your challenges? And and why this I feel like these conversations are so important for our community.
Yeah, and
So,
what are the benefits that specifically feed our realities and feed us? Having this house for me is not the same as a white man who decided to build one in his spare time and have it in the back and Airbnb it for himself. Like, these are
okay,
very different
right,
experiences
right.
and realities for us. But yeah, and it's also not for everyone. This is just, as I say, for
Absolutely.
everybody. Like, this is just one
Absolutely.
expression of what is possible to think about how to reach goals of financial freedom and housing security. But it is something that is a lot more accessible than I think people realize. If you're sitting here and you want to buy a traditional home, like, this might be something to consider that might be even more beneficial to invest in, because you're paying, anyway, those are logistics that maybe
That's
there's a whole other
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So you
but
are
thank
a
you.
poet. Do you
Yes,
see
ma'am.
your home as an extension of your work? It's art, and you've already talked about that, but let's bring that home.
Absolutely.
Talk
Yeah,
talk about how that's
absolutely.
the expression of the work that you're doing.
So so I just talked to a friend the other day, last night actually, and she was just like, you're a whole designer. I never didn't think you were a designer, and it's weird that you're just now considering yourself a designer. As a poet and a writer, particularly poetry, it's a translation of emotion. It's a translation of the human experience. It's a curation of the ways that we bring things into consciousness to ourselves. And so creating this home was a translation of my own needs and desires and the way that I walk in the world and my own value systems, like we discussed. And it's wrapped in my ideals of beauty and remembering and cultural rootedness. And so it is one of the best poems that I have written my whole life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. I would agree with that 100%. And so
Yeah.
here's a question. So I've shared that I feel like I have a responsibility within the tiny house movement, the work that I do, the sharing. Um, do you see yourself as part of the overall tiny house movement, or do you see yourself as, or do you just, and when I say just, I'm in my quote fingers, do you just live in a tiny house?
I think we're creating something new, Ms. Jewel. I think that this conversation and everyone who's witnessing it right now, this is her story in the making right now, because I think that the two of us, and you particularly as the kind of matriarch of whatever is coming from this, that has led the way for many years now, into something different. Because I've watched you kind of be in the tiny house movement, but not be a part of it, and like move us into a different type of conversation that is so not visible and so necessary. And so I consider myself a part of whatever you are doing. And whatever it is that the people in this conversation are eager and wanting to move into, because the tiny house movement, right? This whole idea that there is a movement into tiny living, that alone, as it's articulated, is speaking to people who live in big spaces moving into
Making
tiny spaces.
decisions, absolutely. And
Not
we're already used to. Yes,
That's
absolutely.
right. So what we are doing is something different. I've had the benefit of being of entertaining possibilities of being associated and aligned more with the tiny house movement, as you know, as you've been a part of that journey with me, and I have been less interested in putting my house and myself on pedestals for white people to watch, and more interested in this kind of project that you're doing with launching the series of like, how do we have these real conversations that are by us, for us, that allow us to talk about real things that are needed urgently in this moment in our world, because in the we are not in a privileged position to say that we can continue moving in ways that this country has created for us to move in. We have to consider that we need to be doing something radically different for us to survive. And we're talking about survival still, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're also talking about simultaneously how we can do that in a way that honors an abundance, a beauty, a value system that is rich and that is wealthy and that is something that we all deserve. So I don't know what you're calling this movement, Miss Jewel, but I'm a part of it now, and I'm here with you. So we
Thank
can
you,
call
sis.
it whatever we want to make it, but mostly I am invested in being visible for other people of color, particularly women. And I speak to women mostly because we have lived a reality in which we experience so much violence, in which housing and autonomy is so crucial to our livelihoods. For the women who find themselves in abusive situations and abusive families and partnerships that don't have the same access to work or to income, like, what does it mean for us to be able to live on our own and live in safe ways and healthy ways? Like, this is an urgent call out to consider. So yeah, I don't know. So that's a question that is in process
I
right now as we
I love that
speak.
answer. It was definitely not the direction that I expected the answer to go in when I was writing the question, but I love it and I thank you so much. Okay,
Absolutely.
so
Thank
I've just
you.
got a couple more questions.
Mhm.
Um, and these are kind of just randoms. What would the title of your autobiography be?
Wow. I was not expecting that question. You have to answer that question too. So are you thinking, let me see. I've always loved I took a picture, one of my partners many years ago took a picture of me in which my hair was like it is now all over the place. And I titled it Greñudas Libres. Greñuda Libre, Greñas Libre. And that means wild hairs, or hairs that are liberated. And I feel like I would name that because growing up, my hair was always like this. It was always, wild, and there's a lot of history around in the Latino community, kind of the anti-blackness of what it means to not have straight hair and that's combed and tamed. And so I would always be called greñuda, which means like wild hair. And so part of my healing journey and part of being able to be embrace being a wild, free woman is embracing my hair and embracing who I am. And so maybe I would title it that, Greñas Libres. How
That's
about you?
beautiful. I'm still working on mine because I don't want to write an autobiography, but I do want to put together a picture book of my journey, like a coffee table
Gotcha.
book. And I'm actually still trying to figure out what to title it, because my thought process is kind of around like she designed a life that she loved, but I think that's
Um,
kind of hokey.
it is.
So
What is your version of that? Because that would
yeah,
be great. I like
that's
that.
what that's how I that's the crux of it, but I've got to get it to where it feels more
More
representative
you.
of me and my journeys. But
Yeah.
that's kind of my thought right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What is one question that I didn't ask but you wish that I had asked?
Mm, how interesting. Um, there, uh, Man, I just got emotional real quick.
You tried to get me a minute ago, so it's your turn.
I think that it's a big question that I got asked, and this might be, my own cultural, the culture of my own community is, people ask me as a young single woman who has not had children, who has not been formally married or partnered. Um, what does it mean for me to live in this tiny house in terms of like what I'm considering in the future of a family or living with other people, which is so important to our communities, right? That we coexist intergenerationally and we have children, we have partners, we have all these extended family realities in living. Um, I was dating this person last year and they were just like, you designed that house for one person, and that one person is you. And we've talked about this. And I think that it's a question that I'm sure many other young women have of like, what does it mean for me to invest in designing and building a home that is tiny? As we've seen, I mean, it's possible to live um, in a tiny home with family and children. I mean, I don't know what that looks like or feels like, and nor have I considered it. But in the consideration, there's a question in there about, what does it mean for you to grow in family or partnership while living in this tiny space? I think that's a good question. And I would answer it and say that I'm still in the process of exploring what it means for us to build family and community in alternative living realities. And part of it goes back to me being able to move the house, being able to be on the land, and potentially in the future be on the land with other people whom I call family and whom I make family with. But like you and like we've shared, Ms. Jewel, like I need my space.
Right. Right.
And so regardless of what other homes I build or design or share with others, this house, like Sandra, the famous Chicana Mexican American writer Sandra Cisneros, so famously is known for is the idea of a house. Her last book was called A House of My Own. And she got really famous for a bright house that she had in San Antonio many years ago. But she talks about how, as a deep thinker and a deep feeler and a writer, a woman, a creative woman, how necessary it was for her to have her own home. Not a home to share with a family or children or a partner, but a home and a space where she can be her full self and she can hold her own life and hold herself. And I think that that's part of the journey that is really important to talk about as women of color, is that we aren't often given that luxury and that privilege. And I remember one of your interviews, you said very clearly, I had a child, she's all grown up now, and now I'm building this house for myself because I want this life and I've already identified what I need. And so I think it's important for us to name that as a young woman too, that has identified very early on that I deserve to have my own home and my own space on my own terms and for me. And so I think that
Absolutely.
that's, yeah.
Absolutely. Excellent. I a couple of things there. So maybe about 4 or so years ago, my tiny house was located in the backyard of another home. And the home where I was, the owner of the home, it was a small home, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and the homeowner rented out the rooms in that small home to individuals. So there were 3 different people renting rooms in this space, and they shared the bathroom. And now these were complete strangers. And so one afternoon, one of the guys from the house had wandered over in my space, to quiz me about my tiny house. And so he told me that my house said to anyone watching that I always intended to be alone, that I had designed a space just to always be alone. And
Wow.
he had not been invited to my space at all. And I quickly turned and I said, "You're critiquing my tiny house, yet you live in a space with 2 other strangers sharing a bathroom." And I said, "At any given point, I have more room, more space, more everything in my tiny house, whether it says I want to be alone or whatever, but yet you're over here critiquing my space as you share this space." So it's interesting how people will look into your home. And the other thing I'll say to that is, on the other end of the spectrum, I always hear that same thing. People say, it says you're just always going to be alone. You always get to dream a new dream, is my thought.
Always.
I also hope that I have inspired, in my new location where I've added my sunroom space on and I've increased the size of my home. That's one of the joys and the benefits of a tiny house, is that you get to kind of recreate things, and it's not at the expense of a conventional home. It's a smaller space. So to kind of reinvent, or to, as I call it, my tiny house remix, that cost is not at the same cost of a conventional home. And
Absolutely.
and then on the other side of that is, I am well into my 50s, and I kind of think, I might be open to. I had a conversation with a friend just the other day, and she was like, she's interested. She's putting it out in the world that she wants to be married now. I'm not necessarily saying that, because I've been married. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm kind of clear on, as you were talking about, we need our own space. Like, if he has his space over there, like, I'll visit, you visit, but then I'm gonna need you to go home because I need my space.
And
We can.
listen, we get to decide that.
Right. We can share, we can spend some time together, but I still, I've just been by myself so long, and there's just a peace and a joy. And not saying
Yes.
that somebody couldn't, completely sweep me off my feet, but, I'm a little doubtful of that at this point. But, my space and my peace is so valuable, so
So
valuable.
important. So important. I hear that.
So,
I love that.
so we're share with, I know some people joined late, and I did see a comment where someone was asking your name. Please share your name again with the audience, and please tell us where people can find and support your work. And I'm also going to add all of that information in the description in the video, but please do that now
Yes.
again,
Okay.
please.
So my name is Edyka Chilomé. That's spelled Edyka. Um, and I am a poet, a writer, a woman who is always dreaming a new dream. I love that, Ms. Jewel. And I'm actually an artist who's moving towards doing film and TV and writing for the screen, because I think that this is where the stories that we need to tell for our people should live, as this is a place where
Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. Bear with me just a second. Hopefully, I can get Edyka back on the line.
are we back?
I think
Are
we're
we?
back. Technical
Oh my
difficulty.
goodness.
My bad. I hope this all um, stays connected. I think we're back. Okay, I
Okay,
think we are. Sorry about that.
cool.
Technical
No, that's
difficulty. I
okay.
wasn't
It's
paying
just I'm
attention to
sad
the
that it was
time.
right at the end.
Yes, I wasn't paying attention to the time.
Oh, that's okay. So I was just reintroducing myself. I really just appreciate everybody. I want to be able to read all the comments too, Miss Jewel, because now all the comments are gone. I was like, I can't wait to reread them when we end.
I
But
think they'll be on the video, but this is I'm just learning this tool, so hopefully they'll all be there.
okay, cool. Well, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I really, yeah, I really meant what I said, that I am following Miss Jewel's lead in this new conversation that she's leading the way in for people of color who are interested in talking about what it means for us to choose different living, especially those of us who are born and raised in this country and in urban cities. And so that is my focus, one of my prioritized focus in my work now. But beyond that, I'm an author of 2 books that you can find online. One of them is discontinued, and I made a choice to not continue publishing it. And you can find used copies of it, but apparently it's pretty pricey at this point. But my second book is called The Hummingbird Poems, and it speaks to a lot of the themes that I brought up in this conversation around diaspora and finding home and finding joy and finding peace in ourselves as women of color, as Indigenous women. And it's both in English and Spanish for very particular reasons of connecting generations in my culture and community. So if you're interested in learning Spanish, it's a good little book to try. But you can find that on my website. And my website is edykachilome.com. And I exist also on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And my house has its own page on Instagram. It's at Casita Chilomé. And so if you want to continue following my journey and seeing a little bit more of my house, I decided, Miss Jewel, yesterday that I want to produce a short documentary about my house and my journey that encapsulates a little bit more about more of the themes that we have talked about here today. So thank you for affirming as you're moving. I want to make moves too, and so hopefully
I have an idea
I'll.
for you for that one. So let's talk about it.
Okay, well, let's talk, because I think it's more, like you said, and this whole series represents, it's more than just showing you beautiful pictures. It's about truly understanding what it means for us as women of color, as Indigenous peoples, to choose autonomy and choose the way that we live and how we want to live. So I hope that we can continue those conversations. And anyone who is interested in connecting with me, please reach out. I want to continue building community on all fronts. And so, yeah, that's me. And I'm just so honored to continue working with and befriend this beautiful woman that we all adore and admire and want to support full-heartedly.
Thank you.
Ms.
So
Jewel
this
Pearson.
was about you. So I want to say I had a couple of questions. So I saw some super chats come in, and I think I added them to the broadcast. Again, we're learning this tool. But super chats are like tips that the watchers can choose to share a tip with you, with our guests. And so we've had a couple of super chats, and I thank you all very much for honoring my guest. And feel free while we're still here, if you'd like to share a gift of gratitude for this conversation with Edyka, please do so.
That's
Um,
beautiful. Thank you.
I want to, so again, I'm trying to work out all the things technically. So, sharing some information on what I'm going to be doing on the channel. So, every other Sunday, I will have a guest to continue the conversations on intimate spaces. So that's going to be every other Sunday. So this was the launch, and if you'll be back in 2 weeks for another guest that I'm still working out the details. And then on the alternate Sunday, I'm going to be doing some FAQs. So I'm entitling that "What's Your Question?" and I'll spend some time on YouTube answering questions, some of the questions that might already be on previous posts, or as I get inbox, sharing some information to answer some questions. I saw some questions come in the chat about tiny houses, but that wasn't this discussion. We were talking about Edyka in this conversation. So you don't have to remember all of that if you remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. You'll automatically get notified of the content that's coming out. So again, conversations on intimate spaces will be alternating Sundays, and then in between that, we are going to have some FAQs, some time for me to answer some questions that come out from the community. I don't know if you say your name Desiree or Desiree. Thank you very much. That's my middle name, so I love your name. Thank you very much for the super chat. So they're coming in. I appreciate you all. We're gonna hang on a little bit longer so some other people can have some time to send some super chats. Thank you so much for this conversation. When we were talking about it, and as I've shared on social media, I have participated in all of the conversations where we talk about, where'd you buy that couch, and what about your design style and your aesthetics. But I believe our homes tell our story, or tell a story about us, whether intentional or unintentional. And most of the time, I do believe people, as they get to tiny houses, it is intentional. But that is the intent of what I want to discover in these conversations, about getting to know the person, the intent for their decision to get here to tiny, their design, because like you shared, and as I shared as I was talking about this, it is so much bigger than just the house. The house is a physical manifestation of it, but it is so much more information that it speaks to the person and their journey. And so I thank you, thank you, thank you for being my first guest here. And thanks to everyone who joined us. Apologies again for the technical difficulty, but I'm glad I was able to figure it out and get us back together to wrap this up. So I'll be learning the tool as we go on. Y'all bear with me. I heard I saw a question about my eyeglasses, and it's funny to me because we had a conversation about these glasses. These are these are a pack of 4 readers that I picked up, maybe even on Amazon, because my contacts are being recalibrated. And with age, my farsighted vision, yeah, farsighted is when you can't see close up, is just, it's done. So these are cheap readers, but I thank you all for the love. I appreciate that. So let me see, we got some more super chats. Let me throw these super chats up here for you. Thank you all so much for your kindness, your generosity. Thank you for making this inaugural conversation so exciting for me. Um, Thank you for being my wonderful, wonderful guest, and we will be back. I thank you so much. Everybody have a great rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.